this is going to be the second big episode. Uh, and one thing that I want to talk about today is how you can be better than you are by learning from people that you might never have had the chance to interact with. Now, there's a book that you will have heard of, but if you're not a reader, and if you don't like audiobooks, and if podcasts are your jam, then maybe you won't have read it. Which means that you might not, or you might have missed out on some of the value from it. So the book's called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. So let me know what you think about this episode. I'm going to be looking at my notes to make sure I cover some of the topics and the chapters in the book that are really important. But it would also be great if you've heard or listened to the book, if you let me know what you think. So, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, you know, I would recommend it as one of the first audiobooks for somebody that maybe doesn't have one particular thing they want to get better at. So when I started listening to audiobooks, I started with sales books to get better at my job, sales. Then, when that worked, but the job wasn't specifically um, the right direction for me, then I started to think, well, if I could get better at sales from listening to audiobooks, maybe I could get better at life from listening to audiobooks. Um, and this is one of the first books that I listened to that wasn't a sales related audiobook, and it is really, really just a great book. And the reason I say great book is because it allows you to highlight areas of your life that you might not be doing so great at, personal relationships maybe, and then understand how to get them better. So in this episode, I'm going to go through the different chapters. Seven Habits of Highly Effective People has 7 habits that it talks about, and in these habits, it's essentially just a way to trying to set out rules for your life so that if you've got these rules in place like gravity, uh, the behavior will always follow the rules. And sometimes you'll mess up, but that's okay. So, kind of an overview of the 7 habits of highly effective people is, or one of the main threads that runs through it that's really kind of changed the way that I react to things is this idea that we have to start with the private victories first, so mastering yourself. So these habits focus on moving from dependence, so I'm dependent on you for, my happiness, my success, my something else, whatever, to independence, which is I don't need you for my success, my fill in the blank. And then the final step is interdependence, which is I'm great on my own. I don't need you. But together, we can create a third option that is better than I could have done on my own. And in the West, I think sometimes that interdependence piece can be seen as a weakness. And when I first heard that, I thought, well, why would I want to be interdependent? And it's because you can create more together that would be better than you could do alone. So it's also like taking ideas from different things, like audiobooks. Essentially, it's just taking ideas from people that have written books before. So the first kind of point is to be proactive. And this is one of the first 3 habits that they talk about in the book. So be proactive. The key idea here is that you're responsible. You have the freedom to choose your response regardless of the external situation. So one of the contrasts here are, if you think about being proactive and being reactive is I react to anything that happens. Being proactive is I choose my response. You know, reactive, I respond to you. Proactive, I respond to me. And it's kind of the difference between, I choose and the I have to mindset. So if we think about it like we have the ability to choose, we have the ability to be responsible for our actions. Now, that doesn't mean that we can change and stop things from happening to us, but what it does mean is we have the ability to control our response. We are response able. And that's one of the parts that I really resonated with when I listened to this book. It's the idea that responsible is two words: response able. And if you are responsible, response able, it means that you can handle your responses. You determine how you respond to things. So, as an example, when I read this, one of the areas in my life that I was kind of having a hard time with was uh, living at home and having arguments with family members about random things I didn't care about. Now, if I transported myself back to those situations and I think, well, why am I arguing with this family member? I would say it's because, I'm putting the blame on this, it's because they did this and they did that. They shouted, they did this, and that's why I responded, and now we're in an argument. So, one of the kind of real big reframes here for me was the next time someone shouted at me was to realize I am responsible. I don't need to shout back. If I shouted back, that's being reactive, right? So next time you catch yourself in a situation where you're shouting maybe at someone, just think to yourself, hang on a second, I control my responses. I am responsible. I am response able. I am the person that can allow myself to respond in any way I choose. And if that's someone that's giving you a hard time, you have the ability to say nothing. Saying nothing is actually very powerful, because if you say something, it could spark it off. If you say nothing, you say, oh, right. It pretty much kills the argument. And I think there's another book, I don't know if it's Think and Grow Rich, but it's the idea that someone will run out of steam. There's, if someone's having a go at you, and they're like, and this and that and that and that and that, if you just don't say anything, people can't go on for more than like 3 or 4 minutes. So just don't say anything. They'll run themselves out of steam. Don't ignite their kind of like boiler, and then just move away. And that was one of the real big things for me, realizing that I had that power. So just from that, I improved the relationships, because a lot of the times I think they're the instigator, but my response instigates the continuation of this. Um, so that's one of the big things that I realized. Response able. You can choose your responses. Now it's hard. Sometimes you need to think about it. Sometimes it won't work. Sometimes you will shout back. Sometimes blah blah blah. But that's a real key thing that's really helped me. So that's the being proactive piece. Then there's the kind of next chapter, which is, begin with the end in mind. So the idea is to use your responsibility to visualize and define your life's direction. So one of the examples that the book gives is it's like the difference between leadership and management. So management is making efficiencies, making sure that the things that you're doing are as efficient as possible. And leadership is making sure you're doing the right things. So the example it gives in the book is, imagine you are going through a forest with a group of guys, and the managers are making sure that the axes are sharpened, that the people are going in the right direction, that no one's wasting too much time. And then the leader is the guy that climbs to the top of the tree and says, "We're in the wrong jungle." And I like that because it's quite funny. But it's the idea that leadership, you know, could be the thing that says, you know what, we're not even in the right place here. We need to change direction. We're doing things efficiently, but we're not doing the right things. So the third chapter is putting first things first. So this is the idea that you can exercise your responsibility in aligning your actions with your values and goals. So it's pretty much the idea that you should start with first things first. Now this is kind of a chapter that I suppose it doesn't really stand out to me that much. But these audiobooks, it's not about resonating with the whole thing. It's about saying, well, you know what, I took a piece from that. If you can listen to this book for, 10 hours, which is about a Netflix series, and it can change your relationships with your parents, with your brothers and sisters, with your family members, wouldn't that be worth it? Probably. So the first three chapters are the private victories. So that's responsible. How do I control myself? So I know that I'm not the problem. That's a real big one. And just looking at why do things happen? Why did arguments start? Why did this thing go bad? And not saying, well, it's because they, them, this and that. It's about taking full responsibility, even if it's not a good thing. If someone steals from you, taking responsibility to say, well, actually, how did I allow this to happen? How did I allow the situations to kind of transpire like that? And sometimes it's just about saying, zooming back further, saying, well, I didn't do that. Well, zoom back further. Well, you got up in the morning and you went out of the house. If you didn't do that, it wouldn't have happened. And it's an extreme way to view things, but by taking responsibility, being responsible, saying I'm responsible, it makes you really powerful. If you say they did this and they did that, it gives them the power. And there are certain situations where I can imagine that this doesn't exactly, work or is not so helpful. But this is really helpful for me in my life on how to act when things don't go quite right. So the next three chapters are basically think win-win. So how do you not screw everybody over, and how do you ultimately all get there and be happy about it? Then there's seek first to be understood, then seek first to understand, then to be understood. Then chapter 6 is about synergize. So chapter 4, think win-win, it's kind of similar to that interdependent thing, which says, me plus you equals much better result than me on my own or you on your own. If you think win-win, it's now this is the kind of, it's rooted in the abundance mentality, not scarcity. And this is a really tricky one as well. If you've been brought up to say there is not enough of, scarcity mindset, rather than I have all I need, I can do a great job, I can do the best thing I can do, I can focus on what I've got to do right now in front of me. It can be really hard because life throws you curveballs, and sometimes you don't think you are going to win. But it's just a matter of kind of falling back on the principles, knowing that there are areas in your life which looked bleak, but then you turned it around. Knowing that just by sticking through it, you can potentially make it work. And knowing that maybe you're not in the right place, that is also kind of a big piece, which is hard to differentiate. It's like, how do you know if you're being stubborn or if you're being, what's the word? If you're being stubborn or you're being gritty, you're sticking it out. It's funny, it's hard. So if we think win-win, responsible people don't see life as a competition. They create outcomes where everyone can benefit. So that's kind of the person you'd want to be. Um, and the life that you could live by being that person is an abundant life where you create things, and it's generally good for everybody around you, which is like a self-reinforcing circle. So the fifth one, seek to understand. The idea of listening and instead of reacting, listening with empathy. So this is a deep form of responsibility, listening to understand, not to reply. So this is hard in certain situations. I think the situation I think this is most appropriate is with family members because you love them, and you want to keep them in your life. And as long as they're not like a toxic influence, listening to who they are and what they're trying to say before you respond. This can be really hard. I mean, I've not nailed it, but I think a lot of the times when we speak to people, when they say things, we immediately want to reply. And when they're talking, we're thinking of what we want to say next. It's like a, continuous game of like tag. However, that's not really listening. That is just waiting to respond. And that doesn't create the best conversations. So if you are looking to create better relationships, looking to completely understand where someone's coming from and maybe their motivations, that can be really helpful. Um, so yeah, that's quite interesting. The sixth one is called synergize. So use your responsibility to value differences and collaboration creatively. So the result is the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. Now, I think this can be applied quite a lot in work. You might have someone that does things a different way that you don't agree with, and you could focus on these differences. But sometimes the things that they are good at, you throw away because of the things you don't like about them. Now, working with people is hard, but there are so many things that you can get from even people that you don't think are exactly your kind of person. So you shouldn't really throw the baby out with the bathwater. You should take a second to think about, actually, could I make this better for all of us? Do I have to resort to this idea that it's my way or the highway, that there's nothing good about them? Or can you ask yourself, well, actually, what pieces of what they do are good? What could I learn from? That's helped me a lot in the past year. And then I suppose the last part of this is sharpen the saw. So it talks about, or there's a story that it talks about here where there's two guys chopping or sawing down a tree. And one of the guys disappears every day for an hour and then comes back and he chops way more wood than the other guy. So the other guy's like, what the hell? This guy is not working for an hour. Like, what is happening here? And what's happening is the guy's going away and he's sharpening the saw. He's making it so that when he comes back, he can chop twice as much with half as much work. He's investing in thinking about how he can, this is like management, difference between management and leadership. He's actively doing things to make his equipment better, sharpen his mind, get himself in the game. So, just to look at my notes here. So there's basically 4 dimensions: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. But I think this also, sharpen the saw. Take time to make sure you are okay. take time to make sure that you're looking after the machine, yourself. There's a story it talks about in the book where it mentions the goose and the golden egg, where there's a goose that lays golden eggs, and every day the farmer goes to the goose and he realizes he's got another golden egg. And essentially, it's a story about one day he gets greedy and he says, "Well, I'd like more than one golden egg a day." So he cuts the goose open, and no more golden eggs. So you've got to look after the goose yourself, and sometimes that means taking a bit of time off. Sometimes that means being kind to yourself. Sometimes that means you can't be there for other people every time they need that. And that's just the way it is. So I suppose in a nutshell, this responsibility thing that's really key is, you're not a victim of your genetics, of your upbringing, of your circumstances. You are not your feelings. You have feelings, but you can choose your response. Freedom equals responsibility, plus awareness and choice. So there's a book by Viktor Frankl where essentially the guy that wrote it was in a concentration camp, and he realized that between stimulus and response we have the right to choose. No one can control how you think and what's happening inside your mind, no matter what's happening outside. So you have the power to affect and create change in your life. And it can just start one step at a time. Maybe it's not responding to an aggressive comment. Maybe it's understanding that you had an argument, that something happened that you didn't like, and saying, okay, how am I responsible for this? What can I do to take control of this situation? And that's really powerful. That's really, really, really powerful. You're the captain of your ship. Nobody else can make you think a certain way. You decide to think a certain way. And that's honestly this, like, I'm reading this book again. Well, I'm reading it for the first time actually, in book form. But after I've read it, I'll probably listen to it, because it's written in a really easy to understand way. It's quite funny in some parts. And if you're teaching children or something like that, then, these kind of books can be invaluable to help you understand where are you going right, where are you going wrong, and what are the upsides. So I hope that I've managed to cover this. I'll probably cover it again, it's been the first time. But if you like the book, or if you like this review, let me know. Drop a whatever, comment, like, don't like it, share, whatever. Yeah, but this has been my first audiobook review. So this is one of my favorite books. I suppose if I was going to give it a rating out of 10, it's say like 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10, come on. So yeah, thanks for watching. This is the Audiobook Joe podcast, and I will see you later.